Hey everybody, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. And this one we'll be talking about a lot of things really, but NVIDIA primarily. For the headlining story has a counter to AMD's Smart Access Memory, or SAM, where AMD is permitting that if you have an RX 6000 GPU, Ryzen 5000 CPU, and a 500 series motherboard like X570, you can gain some uplift in performance overall. NVIDIA now says that it has something as well for this feature set, except that it's targeting Intel and AMD support. We'll also be talking about AMD refuting the Ryzen 5000 paper launch allegations, MSI's unfortunate factory fire, Zen 3 Delidded and the die detailed, and a couple of other things. Before that, this video is brought to you by Drop and the new Drop Enter mechanical keyboard. The Drop Enter 10 keyless mechanical keyboard uses an aluminum housing underside to provide rigidity when typing, and topside, it uses smooth Gator-on yellow or tactile Halo True switches. Drop offers this smaller keyboard in black, white, and two-tone black-green, and calls it a beginner mechanical keyboard for soon-to-be enthusiasts. Currently, Drop is offering the keyboard bundled with a PC37X headset, which is actually the main one we use in the office. Learn more at the link in the description below. So first up, quick GN news item. We just restocked our GN blue Pint glasses with the gold rim, the teardown glasses. So these we sold out of very fast when we launched the bar runners, because we do a combo pack of 4 glasses with 1 bar runner for a pretty good discount, but we sold through those so fast that we've been out of stock for about a couple weeks now. So we just got a lot of these back in stock, and those combos are back in stock on store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to pick up a bar runner with the pint glass combo. And if any of you have any issues when you receive them in shipping, just because we're shipping a lot of glassware right now, always feel free to email support@gamersnexus.net and we'll help you out. If, for example, a shipping company decides to do some shock and vibe testing on the packaging. But those are back in stock on the store, so feel free to pick one up. Okay, first major news item. This was actually a discussion we had with NVIDIA. So in a discussion with Gamers Nexus, NVIDIA was quick to inform us that the company would be adding its own PCIe resizable bar, or the PCIe resizable base address register feature. This would be a direct counter to AMD's own Smart Access Memory, and in some of its initial benchmarks where AMD shows the RX 6000 series GPUs, it's often showing some variation of bar, or SAM in its case, and maybe rage mode is sometimes thrown in there as well. So NVIDIA says that this is part of the PCIe specification and has been for quite some time. Our understanding currently is that there is some ability to use a resizable bar in some Linux operating systems. We don't really cover Linux, so not too sure the details on that. But it hasn't really been present in Windows, at least, until AMD started making a big deal out of it for SAM, or Smart Access Memory. Now, as a recap, Smart Access Memory requires that you have a Ryzen 5000 series CPU, something like an X570 motherboard, and then an RX 6000 series GPU. And as a reminder as well of its coverage, when AMD presented its own internal slides for performance expectations of the 6000 GPUs, when it showed SAM with the GPUs, it was often showing that with rage mode also enabled. Rage mode is not really an overclock in a technical sense, AMD's own words to us, and it's more of adjusting the power slider. So when we asked AMD what amount of this percent improvement is SAM versus rage mode, the answer was that rage mode was typically worth about 1 to 2%. So that, if you look at their slide again, would give you an idea for how much of it is SAM, which in those cases was anywhere from 2 to maybe 8 to 11% at the extreme high end. So NVIDIA provided the following public statement to Gamers Nexus. It said, quote, "The capability for resizable or larger BAR is part of the PCI Express specification. NVIDIA hardware supports this functionality and will enable it on Ampere GPUs through future software updates. We have it working internally and are seeing similar performance results. Stay tuned." We're assuming the similar performance results was likely referencing the ones that AMD had posted. In a follow-up question, GN asked about availability on Intel and AMD platforms. We were told the following, quote, "Yes, we are working with Intel now on getting it enabled on Z490, and as long as AMD doesn't lock us out, it should work on any of the 6 motherboards they listed as being compatible with Smart Access Memory so far. The PCI Express specs section 7.8.6 specifies it. This is from revision 4.0, version 1.0, September 27th, 2017. And this is all sent, this part is still sent by NVIDIA. 7.8.6 resizable bar capability. The resizable bar capability is an optional capability that allows hardware to communicate resource sizes and system software after determining the optimal size to communicate this optimal size back to the hardware. Hardware communicates the resource sizes that are acceptable for operation via the resizable bar capability and control registers. Hardware must support at least one size in the range of 1 megabyte to 512 gigabytes. And finally, we were also informed that this would not be restricted to PCIe Gen 4 and that it will work on PCIe Gen 3 as well, which makes sense because Z490 is included in the feature set. We don't have a date yet. We are purely based on assumption and no information from NVIDIA. We're assuming this is going to happen after the RX 6000 launch, but we'll find out soon. If it's going to happen before the launch, it's got to be now, because otherwise it's going to be really hard to get all that testing done with SAM or bar or whatever on both the platforms. Up next, AMD refutes the Ryzen 5000 paper launch allegations. So as ever, allegations of a paper launch and quote, false scarcity and the conspiracies around them have been swirling the internet toilet as a result of the Ryzen 5000 series CPUs being popular and selling through immediately. AMD's Ryzen 5000 launch has gone mostly the same as NVIDIA's RTX 30 series launch, except with a lot less hatred spewed towards media at this point because there aren't follow-ups with board partner cards, so that's an upside. There's been insatiable demand outstripping supply, and compounding matters further, well, TSMC for one, but also the fact that these launches are taking place in a year that's anything but normal in terms of PC demand. Suddenly, PC is dead has not really been true anymore. It stopped following that trajectory, and now PC is doing quite well because everybody needs one at home to do their work or whatever. All right, so consumer spending's through the roof. Customers are to some extent competing with bot purchases, but companies are trying to start to thwart this. And it's been basically Black Friday sales volume every month for the last several months now. So that if demand wasn't already high enough, Ryzen 5000 was met with near universal praise, further spurring interest in AMD's latest CPUs. Yet a couple weeks removed from launch, and the CPUs are still hard to find, at MSRP anyway. This led some Twitter users to revisit a tweet from AMD's Frank Azor regarding a paper launch, when Azor did what AMD Twitter executives do best and took jabs at NVIDIA for a lack of availability after the RTX 30 launch. Now, responding to annoyed potential customers, Azor said the following, quote, "There's a big difference between paper launch and shipping tons of units, but demand exceeds supply," he said in one response to a Twitter user. Funny, that's what NVIDIA also said. How the turntables, as they say. Azor also took this opportunity to address concerns over whether or not AMD took enough precautions to ensure its customers and not bots received the product. He said, quote, "Yes, we made a strong effort and succeeded in many cases. It's a battle that is never completely won, but I applaud our team's effort and those of our partners during this round. We continue to learn and adapt with every launch. We want our products in the hands of their intended users." This we 100% agree with. There's probably some cynicism out there about, well, but what do they care if they're selling to bots versus users? They definitely care. These companies want to sell to users, and it's for a lot of reasons. Same for the major retailers, like Newegg, for example. If you think about Micro Center or Newegg, the reason they want to sell to a variety of users rather than just one person who fills a shopping cart with GPUs or CPUs is because when Micro Center, as a great example of a physical store location, when Micro Center sells a GPU to one person, there's a very good chance that they're selling a whole bunch of other components, like 7 of them, to that person as well to build a brand new computer. And this is ideally what they would want. For the GPU and CPU companies, they're looking for more market share. So there's been a lot of cynicism we've seen. Some of it's healthy, some of it not so much. We would encourage maybe taking a step back if you're mad at the situation and just waiting for a little bit as the supply tries to stabilize. But it benefits AMD and its competitors to increase market share and reach more users, especially AMD, which is still trying to gain trust in the mainstream audience. It benefits them to reach more people and start building that foundation so that it can expand to take back, well, as close to half the market as it can, depending on which market you're looking at. So with regards to artificial scarcity, we talked about this last week, but again, with silicon companies, you're getting into kind of crazy person conspiracy territory. When you think there's artificial scarcity about, especially NVIDIA's GPUs, that was the strangest one, because it didn't make any sense. People were saying NVIDIA rushed launch to try and get their product out ahead of AMD's because NVIDIA knew something that everyone else didn't. Okay, let's assume that's true. That might be reasonable. The next theory that was then spouted was NVIDIA has artificial scarcity. How do those two things make sense with each other? They don't. You wouldn't rush your product out if you're scared of your competitor and then say, you know what? We're only going to sell a couple of these. Ha! That'll show them when everybody buys their product instead of ours because it's not in stock. Yeah, some of this scarcity conspiracy theories online, they don't make a lot of sense for silicon products when you're talking $1 billion invested and needing to recoup that cost right away. But either way, AMD, like NVIDIA, has had insane demand issues, and it's very likely this will follow for the RX 6000 series as well. So just go ahead and get ready for that mentally now. As a reminder, TSMC makes all of the AMD stuff right now for the most. So the SoCs for the consoles, the CPU silicon, the GPU silicon, I/O die, a little different, but those things mostly are coming from TSMC. NVIDIA is working with Samsung and is allegedly trying to start working with TSMC again for its current silicon, current Ampere GPUs, or future ones. So there's only so much supply TSMC will sell, for example, AMD, and that supply of wafers has to then be diced up, literally, between its various products. And when Sony and Microsoft are massive customers with launches at the same time for end of year, it's very likely that AMD diverted as much of its supply as it was able to towards those consoles to keep its major partners happy. So probably after we get through sort of holiday buying season, you'll see more CPUs and maybe GPUs popping up on market once the consoles have gone through their presumably successful launch. Up next, a bit of an unfortunate story. Recently, MSI's Bao'an Shenzhen factory suffered from a fire. This is actually a factory that we visited in March of 2019. We've got 2 different tour videos of it. One is of the motherboard section, one's of the GPU section where they had socketable GPU testers, things like that. So those videos went up last year. We'll show some footage of it during this story. But the factory has 10 main SMT lines, or service mount technology lines. Those are each about 121 meters long. They're massive. And that particular factory, the one that caught fire in the news in the last week, that is responsible for producing about 1.6 billion motherboards per month, at least as of 2019, and a similar amount of video cards per month. The factory's machinery includes robotic testing and assembly, automated circuit control, exhaustive GPU, thermal testing, SMT lines, of course, and those are comprised of solder masks and the soldering machines, solder reflow stations, automated optical inspection, and the coolest ones, my favorite to watch, pick-and-place machines, where they're basically Gatling guns filled with capacitors, MOSFETs, and everything else that then rapid fire them at the motherboard. So the cause of the fire in the Bao'an district was not disclosed, and the good news is that MSI is reporting there are no injuries, and the production lines allegedly have also not been damaged, although they presumably were shut down for a while. MSI also released an official statement. The company said the following, quote, "A fire accident occurred in the MSI Bao'an factory in Shenzhen on November 5th afternoon. MSI activated its emergency measures and notified the fire department to deal with it immediately. No injuries were caused and the production line was not damaged. In the future, MSI will continue to strengthen the education and training of personnel. At present, all units are operating normally. Thank you for your concern." We're probably not really going to get much of a follow-up on that one. The only things we'd be curious about were what caused it, and that wasn't revealed at this time. However, if you're interested in seeing more of that factory in its working state and its operating condition after seeing some of the footage we just showed, you can search our channel, just youtube.com/gamersnexus, click on the search icon, and type in MSI Factory, and you'll find a couple of videos from our factory tour series. Next one, Zen 3 Delidded and the die exposed. Twitter and Flickr user Fritz has delidded somewhat brutally a Ryzen 5 5600X to the dismay of many people out there who were unable to get one. And this was to reveal the die and the circuitry mounted atop it. So Fritz has been doing this for quite some time now. You've likely seen the die shots done by Fritz in the past, even if you didn't know it was him who did them. And he's been dismantling CPUs and GPUs to offer high-resolution photographs of the silicon and the die. In his latest excursion with the Ryzen 5 5600X, Fritz inadvertently removed the CCD from the substrate while delidding. Just makes for better photos, it's all right. And for the uninitiated, Ryzen CPUs make use of a soldered IHS, at least these ones do. There are a couple of them that are paste like some of the APUs in the past. These are soldered though, and that complicates the delidding process and does increase the risk of damaging something. Still, the photos, which you can see via Twitter and Fritz's Flickr account, that's difficult to say, offer a nice view of what underpins Zen 3. Specifically, the Ryzen 5 5600X consists of a single CCD. We knew this part, but it's a single CCX as well. That's something AMD informed everyone of for launch. However, you can still see the contacts for the second CCD on the die, the blank ones. There's also the separate I/O die that contains Zen 3's I/O components. Up next, Apple in the news. Apple's M1 CPUs were surfaced this week, so Apple's made good on its promise to deliver some form of custom Apple silicon before the year's end. And in transitioning away from its traditional suppliers, like Intel CPUs, Apple will be developing its own ARM-based processors, and those will be for the Mac computers, as it's been doing for its iOS devices already with the A-series SoCs for a couple of years now. In its reveal, Apple provided a very top-level overview of the M1 processors. It was completely outfitted with somewhat absurd marketing language at times, but that's Apple. That's the company that says it's magical, so about what we'd expect. At any rate, at a high level, the new M1 CPUs look like sort of a beefed up A14 Bionic SoC, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it makes it a little bit more natural for Apple to transition. Apple previously showed signs of aiming somewhat low in the beginning of its transition to ARM, opting to outfit entry-level Macs with Apple Silicon first and scale upwards from there. Thus, that's what we have. The MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini will be the first Macs endowed with M1 chips. Much like Apple's A14 Bionic, Apple's M1 is manufactured on TSMC's EUV-based N5 process. These are comprised of what Apple calls Firestorm and Ice Storm cores. So specifically, the split is going to be the Firestorm cores are larger, the Ice Storm cores are smaller, and specifically the M1 will have 4 Firestorm cores and 4 Ice Storm cores, but we really can't wait for the Stormblood Cache and the Inferno Fabric that are coming out later. 2 of those things aren't real names. We're going to let you figure out which ones they are. Additionally, the M1 will make use of Apple's 16-core machine learning processor, or its neural engine, as Apple, this sounds like it's like a Final Fantasy game right now. The M1 will also feature a unified memory architecture with increased L2 cache and 8 16-bit LPDDR4X DRAM channels. An 8-core GPU takes up considerable amount of the 16 billion transistor budget for the SoC, and all the chip components have access to a shared SLC buffer. While Apple and its products typically aren't really within the purview of our audience, this move is an important one nonetheless. It echoes Apple's 2005-6 departure from IBM's PowerPC ISA to adopt x86 class offerings from Intel. Now, Apple is leaving Intel in favor of the ARM ISA. While ARM has made a few appearances in x86 dominated segments, like servers and workstations, the ecosystem has never had such a broad push into client computing outside of smaller devices and smartphones. If Apple succeeds here, it'll have big implications for the CPU landscape and its reigning x86. This one's pretty interesting. Intel announces its first add-in GPU for servers this time. So Intel has achieved a somewhat important milestone in its DGPU or discrete GPU journey. The company, the chip designer, is now officially announcing its first discrete GPU, and that is carved out of the Intel Xe-LP silicon. This is the Intel server GPU getting announced now anyway. This GPU, which takes the shape of an add-in card, is aimed at, quote, high-density, low-latency Android cloud gaming and media streaming, per Intel's wording. The Intel server GPU is built with 4 Intel Xe-LP Iris Max GPUs, which Intel formerly called DG1. The GPUs are packaged onto an SoC with a 128-bit pipeline and 8 GB of onboard memory. The GPUs are built on Intel's new 10nm SuperFin process, and the Intel server GPU, also known as XG310, comes in a full-height, 3/4 length AIC form factor courtesy of H3C, one of Intel's manufacturing partners. According to Intel, the XG310 is now shipping. So the next story is going to have a lot of quotes in it from AMD mostly, but this is about AMD offering some Zen 4 and RDNA 3 roadmap updates. It was in an interview with The Street where AMD's EVP of Computing and Graphics Business Group, Rick Bergman, dished on a number of topics. So the topics range from AMD's mobile CPUs, talked about, again, Zen 4, RDNA 3, it talked about AMD's venture into Chromebooks, partnership with TSMC, and Ryzen supply and demand for the 5000 series. In a response to a question from the street regarding how much of Zen 4 improvements will be based on TSMC's 5nm process or clock speed versus core count increases, Bergman had the following to say, quote, "Given the maturity of x86 architecture now, the answer has to be kind of all of the above. If you looked at our technical document on Zen 3, it was this long list of things that we did to get that 19% IPC gain. Zen 4 is going to have a similar long list of things where you look at everything from the caches to the branch prediction to the number of gates in the execution pipeline. Everything is scrutinized to squeeze more performance out. Certainly," the quote continues, "manufacturing process opens an additional door for us to obtain better performance per watt, and so on, and we'll take advantage of that as well." Bergman also fielded a question regarding the upcoming RDNA 3 architecture and if AMD would be targeting similar performance per watt improvements that RDNA 2 has allegedly brought. Quote, "Let's step back and talk about the benefits of both. So, why did we target, pretty aggressively, performance per watt improvements for our RDNA 2 GPUs? And then, yes, we have the same commitment for RDNA 3. Kind of strange corporate phrasing there, but I think we get the idea. Next quote was, "It just matters so much in many ways because if your power is too high, as we've seen from our competitors, can't not dig people, AMD. You always got to take digs at people. Suddenly our potential users have to buy bigger power supplies, very advanced cooling solutions, and in a lot of ways, very importantly, it actually drives up the bill of materials of the board substantially. This is a desktop perspective, and invariably that either means the retail price comes up or your GPU cost has to come down." That's not sure I 100% agree with some of that. Anyway, on Infinity Cache and RDNA 2, they talk a little bit about efficiency and cooling solutions, things like that. They mention exotic cooling solutions and trying to avoid them. It's a little bit overblown. Their competitors aren't really doing that. So Intel does have a cryo cooler though. We'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, they talked about the roadmaps a little bit and there was mostly marketing speak. There's not a whole lot of technical detail you can take away right now. Not too surprising really, but a process shrink will be the biggest takeaway for what's happening next. And then finally, Intel's cryo cooling tech. So Intel's cryo cooler technology, which is underpinned by the basic concept of thermoelectric cooling, or TECs, made its way into a pair of products. There's a Peltier-based water block from EKWB and an AIO from Cooler Master, which we're actually getting in theory. Thermoelectric cooling works by way of creating a temperature disparity or gradient between two different surfaces. One side gets hot, the other gets cooled, and these are often referred to as accept and reject plates in the cold plate. Voltage is applied to the TEC device to transfer heat from one side to the other. This type of cooling is by no means new, even to the enthusiast overclocking space, but it's rarely garnished enough support to implement into consumer products. A long time ago, we tested the Phononic Hex 2.0. It was unfortunately not good as a cooler product. It's about a 92mm tower, so it did have a small fan in there, and you plugged a 6-pin PCIe cable into it, and it would cool. Unfortunately, because of the sizing of it, the pricing of it, it just really wasn't good as a product level implementation of a cooler, because you could get like a cheap tower cooler and a standard one, it'd be a lot better. So we have seen them in consumer products for DIY in the past. It's just they're not common, especially not in the last several years, last decade or so. So anyway, more commonly, these solutions are found in industrial applications. We use this example a lot, but Phononic and its parent company actually provide solutions for digital signage. So that'd be like digital advertisements outside, fast food drive-through signs, things like that, where they're sitting baking in the sun all day, but also have electronics. And so you'll typically see a solution of either like a huge sort of graphite thermal pad where the tubes in it are oriented horizontally to spread the heat, not to transfer it necessarily into another solution. Or you'll see TECs, or a mix of both, where you're just trying to keep the thing running while it's baking in the sun all day, and you need a little bit more than just fans since your ambient temperature is so high. So that's where you typically see them. Intel, though, and its partners, EKWB and Cooler Master here, are touting the use of Intel's cryo cooling, as they're calling it, to drive temperatures well below ambient. EKWB is offering the EK Quantum X Delta Tech, a CPU water block replete with a TEC plate and a mounted USB-based controller that monitors for temperature and condensation. Actually a pretty interesting deployment. And condensation buildup is one of the byproducts of TEC cooling, so special care does have to be taken to insulate the cooler and its components. EKWB further states that the heat generated by the TEC plate is removed via a traditional liquid loop Cooler Master has the ML360, which is part of its Master Liquid AIO line that should be familiar to most people. Cooler Master has opted to integrate its tech plate into the cold plate, sitting underneath the pump block housing. Additionally, it appears Cooler Master has also incorporated a separate PCB controller into the block housing to monitor temperature and dew point, which seems to have increased the size of the overall block housing. This is likely the reason the ML360 uses a separate front-mounted loop, which you can see in CM's documentation. Pricing for the Cooler Master solution is to be determined. We do, in theory, have a call with them sometime in the next week, though, after the RX 6000 launch. EKWB's EK Quantum X Delta Tech water block is $360 right now. And, of course, these coolers are only compatible with Intel's LGA 1200 sockets. That's probably the biggest misfortune of it, but maybe they can be adapted if you have something else you want to use it on. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, you can subscribe for more or go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up the freshly restocked pint glasses, including the combo pack with the bar runners. Again, thank you to everyone who has picked one of those up. It's been awesome to see the photos, and we'll see you all next time.